If you want to know how to animate your wipers for Assetto Corsa using Blender, you've came to the right video. This tutorial assumes that you're familiar with taking an FBX from Blender, importing it into KS Editor, and exporting your KN5 with all your textures and everything. I only cover what is needed to create, export, and add your wiper animations. With that said, let's jump into Blender and get started. Now on the lower left hand side of the screen there's a little mouse image. There you can follow along with my keystrokes and mouse clicks to see exactly what I'm pressing and doing. I encourage you to pause or slow down the playback of the video to follow the keystrokes if you feel a little lost. So the first thing we need to do is identify and isolate the wiper and wiper arm meshes. You can see I already have all my Chrome objects joined into one in order to save on the object count for this car. But for the wiper animation, I will need to separate the wiper pieces individually. After selecting the mesh object for the Chrome here, I can tab into edit mode and go and hit / to go into an isolated view mode where it will be just the object that is the Chrome mesh. Then I can go in and highlight and select the individual mesh pieces for the wiper arm to separate them. One of the tricks I'll utilize a lot in this first little bit is going into wireframe mode by pressing Z. And then I will also press C to bring up the brush selection tool and brush over all the vertices that I want to select for the wiper arms. And then I will hit escape to exit out of the selection mode. And with everything selected that I want to separate, I'll press P and use separate by selected, and that will separate the objects that I have highlighted from the rest of the mesh, and now they'll be their own separate object. Another selection method I use is mousing over a vertice and then pressing the L key, which will allow you to select any connected mesh to that vertice. And if there are overlapping vertices while you are in the wireframe viewport mode, if you hover over that same vertice, you can continue to press L and it will select any overlapping mesh as well. Then once again, when you have all the mesh pieces that you want to create for your new object selected, you can go ahead and hit P and then separate by selected and you'll have your new object. If you're zooming in pretty far to select very specific meshes to make sure you're selecting all the right stuff, you might want to adjust your clipping to allow you to get closer without objects disappearing from your camera's view. To do that, you can press the N key to bring up the viewport menu on the right hand side, and then we'll navigate to the View tab. And within the View tab, we'll go into the clip start and lower that value down. What I would do is I'll just typically add a 0 to bring it from 0.1 to 0.01, and that will allow me to get in usually as close as I need to. Once you have all your mesh pieces separated for your wiper arms, the next step would be to create and place the necessary empties. Now the car pipeline given to us by Kunos, that's included with every Assetto Corsa install, will say to name the wiper empties wiper in all caps, underscore, and then a number. So following, for example, wiper underscore 1, wiper underscore 2, wiper underscore 3. I only need 3 empties per arm in this case to get a decent animation going. So I'll use wiper 1, wiper 2, wiper 3 for the first arm, the driver's side. And I'll use wiper 4, wiper 5, and wiper 6 for the passenger side. As you can see here, I left this base piece of this wiper mount joined to the rest of the Chrome part since this part stays stationary and we want to keep our object count down. But however, to place the empty exactly where we want it, what I want to do is tab into edit mode, and then we're going to select the mesh around the pivot point. So it's going to be this circle here. And then I will use Shift S to bring up a selection menu, and I will use cursor to selected. And this will move my 3D cursor into the center of everything I have selected. With our cursor placed where we want it, we'll go ahead and hit Shift A to bring up our add menu. Then under the empties section, we're going to add in a plane axis. Once we have our plane axis added into our scene here, we can go ahead into the object menu on the right hand side, which would be the little orange square tab icon. And then under that, there will be a viewport display section where we can go ahead and tick the axis checkbox. And this will put a letter at the tip of each axis so we know which one's the Z, which one's the X, and which one's the Y. This comes in handy because Assetto Corsa uses a Z forward, Y up orientation for all the axes. We'll want to keep that into consideration while we are placing our wiper empties across the wiper pivot points. After pressing R to rotate, if we go ahead and double tap the Z key, the X key, or the Y key, it will constrain our rotation, so it will only rotate on whatever axes for the respective key that we pushed. This really comes in handy when we're doing all the animations. Don't forget to label your empty as well, which this will be wiper_1, wiper being in all caps. You can rename the object from the top of the object menu, which would be the little orange square on the right hand side. Where it says empty, we'll want to replace that with wiper in all caps _1. Once we're happy with the position of wiper 1, we can go ahead and select all the vertices around the next pivot point, which would be this section here on this arm. Once we have them all selected, we can go ahead and hit Shift S to do a cursor to selected. Then we can deselect that, select our wiper 1 empty. To duplicate wiper 1 with it selected, we can go ahead and press Shift D, and then we can left click to place it. And with the new duplicated wiper object, we can go ahead and do a Shift S, and then we will do selection to cursor, which will now move our newly duplicated and selected wiper empty to the new spot. And again, you'll have to rotate and manually adjust all the axes in order to get it lined up exactly the way you need it to be. And don't forget to, again, go over into our object menu, the little orange square on the right hand side, and up at the very top of that, go ahead and rename our new duplicated wiper 1 to wiper 2. Once we have our wiper empty positioned and rotated how we want it, we can go ahead and select this first little wiper arm piece here, and then we'll select the wiper 1 empty and go ahead and do Control P and select object, keep transform, which will then parent our wiper piece to the wiper empty. And then we'll want to go ahead and do the large wiper arm portion to wiper 2, and we'll want to also parent wiper 2 to wiper 1. The thing to note here is that whatever is highlighted in dark orange will be parented to whatever is highlighted in the yellow or the bright orange. Repeating the same process that we did for wiper 2, we can go ahead and select our vertices around the pivot here, move our cursor, then go ahead and duplicate wiper 2 and move it to our new pivot location. Again, don't forget to rename wiper 2's new duplicate to wiper 3. Once you get wiper 3 positioned and rotated how you want, go ahead and parent the wiper blade rubber and the wiper blade plastic, or chrome in this case, to the new wiper 3 empty. And once more, following what we did with wiper 2, we're going to go ahead and parent wiper 3 to wiper 2. So for a completed wiper, we should have the first little tab here parented to wiper 1. We should have this large wiper arm here parented to wiper 2, and wiper 2 will be parented to wiper 1. And then for the final section, we'll have the wiper blade and the wiper blade rubber parented to wiper 3, and wiper 3 will be parented to wiper 2. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat this same process over here on the passenger side for wiper empties 4, 5, and 6. With everything in position and all the meshes and empties parented to where they need to be, we can go ahead and move on to the animation. In order to prep for the animation, what we'll do is I'm going to bring my mouse down here to the lower left-hand corner of the viewport and look for the cursor to change to a little crosshair. Once it's changed to a crosshair, I can then left-click and drag upwards to add a new viewport split. And once the new split is about the size that I want it to look, I will go ahead and change it to the timeline viewport by pressing this button here and selecting timeline. And with the timeline viewport open, I'll go ahead and set the start frame to 0 and the end frame to 40. I've always used a 40 frame timeline for the wipers. I think you can use more frames if desired. You just have to make sure you have an equal amount of frames before the starting point to where the midpoint or where they're at the furthest travel for the wipers are, and then back to the end point, which should be the same as your starting point. So when you go ahead and hit play back on the animation, it should loop seamlessly. With our timeline viewport set up and our frame count set up, we can now go ahead and start adding keyframes. So to do that, we'll want to make sure our frame selection here is all the way at 0 to our starting frame. And then we'll go ahead and select our wiper 1 empty. And we'll go into the object menu on the right hand side. Again, the little orange square. And then there should be a rotation section here. And with our empty selected and our frame counter at 0, we can go ahead and mouse over the rotation section and press the I key, which will insert a keyframe here at our starting frame of 0. And then we'll want to go ahead and repeat this for every empty for our animation here, so all the way through wiper 6. And again, we only need to do this to the empties, and we don't need to worry about any of the object meshes. Just animate the empties. With the keyframe set up for all our empties, we can now go ahead and focus on the full sweep of the wiper, which will focus on using wiper 1 and wiper 4, since that handles the main rotation here. Now we'll want to think about how far the wipers are going to sweep across the glass here, and we'll want to think about how many frames we want to do this in. So I'm using a 40 frame animation, so that means by frame 20 my wipers need to be at their full spot or their full peak, and so that means every 5 frames I'm going to want to do about a quarter of the distance there. And because of how the wiper arm works, this first solid chunk here of wiper 1, it only rotates around the pivot. It doesn't rotate up and down. It just rotates around the pivot here on the Z axis of our empty. So that's all I'm going to focus on. So to do that, I'm going to select my empty, press R to go into rotate, and then double tap the Z key and to constrain our rotation here to the local Z axis of our object. I'll rotate it up till it looks about a quarter of the distance of my full sweep that I want here. And then I'm going to mouse over our rotation menu of our rotation section of the object menu on the right and press I to insert my keyframes. And now I'm going to go ahead and match the same distance using wiper 4 on the passenger side. And with frame 5 taken care of now, I'm going to go ahead and move to frame 10. Go ahead and do another quarter rotation of my sweep here and insert my keyframes. And I'm going to keep repeating this process until frame 20 where it's at its peak. So now that we've animated both sides up to frame 20, we can actually duplicate our keyframes and move them to the respective side or mirror them between frame 20 and frame 40 to go all the way back down to 0. So I'm going to take the keyframe here on frame 15. I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D, and then I'm going to move it to frame 25. So that way, once our animation goes up to frame 20, it's going to start moving backwards now at frame 25. And then again, I'm going to copy the same one. So frame 10, I'm going to duplicate and move to frame 30. Frame 5, I'm going to duplicate and move to frame 35. And frame 0, our starting frame, I'm going to duplicate and move to frame 40, which is our end frame. Once I have all our frames our keyframes duplicated, I can then go ahead and play our animation, and you should see our wipers now sweeping back and forth in a loop. Now our next step here is to go into wiper 2 and wiper 3 empties, and then the same respective empties on the passenger side. And then we got to adjust it, which I'm actually going to rotate across the y-axis for these because that is how I set up my pivots. And then I will go ahead and adjust every 5 keyframes to make sure the wiper arm or blade is not clipping through the windshield glass here. So now when you're fine adjusting the wiper here so that way it's not clipping through the glass, make sure you look at it and move a viewport around to look at it from more than just one angle, because sometimes it will look like you're all good and then you'll rotate your viewport and you'll realize you're still clipping. So just be sure to look around and double check that you're not clipping through the windshield at all. You can see here on the passenger side I don't have to adjust my second pivot to get the wiper arm off the glass. It's actually in the same position, but I'm gonna go ahead and add another keyframe anyways just to make sure that my pivot is exactly where I want it to be for that keyframe. And this is just like we did with the first 2 main pivots. You only really have to animate up to frame 20 or your middle frame there. Then you can go ahead and duplicate them on the way back down. Once you have everything all set up and adjusted so it's no longer clipping at your major keyframe points, so on my points every five frames, it looks good. I'm going to go ahead and play the animation. And what we'll notice here is that it still ends up clipping in a couple spots under through the glass, even though on the keyframes they're fine. Because the motion gets kind of averaged between the 2 keyframes while it's sweeping, we'll need to go ahead and refine a couple spots still. So it looks like about frame 17 seems to be the worst offending frame here, so we'll go ahead and add a new keyframe and adjust that out of the way, make sure it's no longer clipping. Up until now, everything has been done on evenly spaced keyframes, and this is just because that is the simplest approach. It's not actually mandatory to have everything be this symmetrical. To address any remaining clipping, just go ahead and add a keyframe on the worst offending frames and adjust the wipers as needed. Which again, you will probably also need to do the same thing on the return portion of the animation as well. So once you're done animating your worst offending keyframe on the upstroke, go ahead and duplicate and position that duplicated keyframe on the downstroke as well. Once we get it all cleaned up, we'll do another final inspection, which this looks good, and now we're ready to go ahead and get exporting. First, what we'll want to do is select the whole car, including our wiper and wiper empties. So this is everything for our car, and we'll go ahead and export that FBX. So here's what my export settings look like by the individual sections. Go ahead and compare and contrast to make sure your export settings match my export settings. Main ones being I have limit to selected objects under the include section. And then under the transform, I have the scale set to 0.01 with the apply scaling set to all local. And then under the geometry section, I have smoothing set to normals only and only the apply modifiers checkbox ticked. I don't think I changed anything to armatures, but again, just make sure your settings look like mine. And then finishing off our settings here with the baked animation checked, but all the sub checkboxes under that section are unticked. Now with our export settings correct, we can go ahead and export our main car FBX. So now that we have our car exported, we'll go back here and select just our empties for the wiper. So wiper empties 1 through 6. We don't need to worry about the objects. We are just selecting the empties. And with our empties selected, we'll go back and open up our FBX export menu. And again, we'll use the same exact settings we used for the car. And then we'll call this FBX car underscore wiper. So then we'll go ahead and hit export. So with our car FBX exported and our car wiper FBX exported, we can go ahead and jump into KS Editor. And once more, I'm not going to cover texturing or shading of your model. I'm going to assume you already know how to deal with KN5s and create a KN5. We're just going to focus on the animation portion. And because I've already textured this car and set up all the shaders on it and saved the persistence in KS Editor, it's already going to be all shaded and textured for me here when I import it. And then I can just focus on the wipers. So look in here, once it's imported, we can take a look at the wipers. They look just like they look in at their 0 position. And we'll go over to File and hit Open FBX Animation. And then we'll want to go ahead and select our car wiper animation, or our car wiper FBX. And it will take a second to load in here, and once it does, you can kind of look ahead and you can see my wipers have moved a little bit. Then we can go into the Animation tab. And under the Animation tab, we can play with this slider to sweep our animation back and forth to make sure it plays exactly how we want. And in this case, it looks good. So with the animation looking good in KS Editor, we can go ahead and export our KN5 here. So again, we're going to go up to File, Export KN5. I already have this, I've already been working on this car a little bit, so it's already all set up. I'll just export it straight out. So once we opened our car_wiper animation in KS Editor, it automatically created a file called car_wiper.KSanim. That file is used in our animations folder, which when KS Editor made that folder, it made it in the same file your FBX was in. So be sure to take that newly created KSanim file, the car_wiper.KSanim, and copy that into the animations folder in your car data, as well as copying your recently created KN5 into your car data. And with the files copied, we can now go ahead and open the car in Content Manager Showroom, and then go over into the car menu and tick the animation wiper animation checkbox. And if everything was done correctly, your animation should be working.